Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Greetings from Gillette, Wyoming this week, folks. You may have noticed the order of the episodes is somewhat, out of order. I ran into some technical difficulties while producing episodes during my final 2 weeks down in Riverton that it sort of forced this issue. I had a great episode in the can and ready to release it, but two things happened. The first was I had to switch hotels at halfway point through my month-long stay down there in Riverton, and the second is the hotel's Wi-Fi was less than desirable. It was so bad, in fact, that I couldn't even open a website on my phone, tablet, or even MacBook. I stuck with the 1 bar of LTE cell signal that I could obtain just to maintain voice contact with my bride. The second problem was that the recordings I thought I saved turned out to be not saved at all. They were saved, but they were corrupted. I will get around to releasing that episode real soon, as it deals strictly with Sevier County politics, and the voters here need to have that information and be made aware of certain things before the 2026 primaries come up, the local primaries. So with that, welcome to another episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Today, we're diving into a story of leadership that'll fire you up and remind you what it means to stand tall against the odds. Our guest today is an author by the name of Dennis Brennan, and he is the author of the book titled D.C. Swamp Strikes Back: Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and Their Similar Battles. This book is a masterclass in how true leaders, Mr. Aaron Burr and our 45th and 47th president, Donald J. Trump, faced down the D.C. swamp with courage, grit, and an unshakable commitment to the people. Dennis is here to show us how leadership thrives when the elites try to tear it down, and folks, you're not going to want to miss this. Dennis Brennan is a historian and writer with a passion for uncovering the truth about what makes a leader great. He spent years studying the battles that define America's fight for liberty, and in D.C., Swamp Strikes Back, he nails it, showing how Burr and Trump, two fearless leaders, took on the same corrupt establishment centuries apart. Dennis's research digs deep into Burr's showdown with the political machine of his day, think smear campaigns and a sham treason trial orchestrated by power-hungry elites. Sound familiar, doesn't it? Well, it's the same playbook used against Trump with endless indictments and media hit jobs. Dennis doesn't just tell history, he shows us how leadership rises above the swamp's lies to fight for what's right. What makes Dennis so special is his ability to spotlight the kind of leadership that inspires us all. He shows how Burr, a vice president and founding father, led with audacity, refusing to let the elites silence him even after they branded him a villain. Trump's the same, leading with unrelenting strength, taking on the deep state and rallying millions to demand freedom, to demand liberty. Dennis's work is a call to almost every patriot listening. Leadership isn't about playing nice with the swamp. It's about standing firm, speaking truth, and never backing down. His book is a roadmap for understanding how these leaders navigated impossible odds, and it's packed with lessons for anyone who wants to lead in their own life. For our audience, Dennis Brennan is the voice you need to hear. He's not just a scholar, he's a patriot who gets what's at stake here in the fight for liberty. Today, we're going to unpack how Burr and Trump's leadership can inspire us to take on the establishment in our own way. So grab a seat, folks. This is Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, and Dennis Brennan is about to show us what real leadership looks like. So let's do this. Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government
as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Dennis, he's like I told you in the introduction, he's an author of a great and fantastic book that I believe you should all check out. We're going to talk a little bit about how we came to putting this book together. So, Dennis, if you want to, just give us a brief introduction to yourself and everything Dennis.
Everything Dennis. Okay. That's my favorite topic, so I'll be able to handle that. My name, Dennis Brennan. I've been an attorney for about 35 years. I'm based in Illinois, not in Chicago, and out in the suburbs, county over from Cook County. So, been in Illinois my whole life, born and raised. In addition to being an attorney, I wrote the book recently, DC Swamp Strikes Back, Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and their similar battles. I'm a convert to the Trump movement. When he first ran back in 2015, I was skeptical, I'd say to say the least. I did end up voting for him in 2016, so he changed my mind quickly. I have voted for him 3 times, so I guess to some extent I'm a fan. As far as politics, I was raised a Democrat. My dad was a precinct captain in Cook County, and I actually walked precincts with him. I was the first to switch in my family to the Republicans. Not everyone has, but I would keep trying to pull them over. And I think, as much as I had to change to switch to the Republicans, Donald Trump has changed the Republican Party, where you might see more Democrats moving over.
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about your book. But what first inspires you to connect Aaron Burr and his battles with Donald Trump's, and how did you realize that the DC swamp was the common enemy in both stories?
Yeah, it's funny. There's a friend of mine who's a Democrat political consultant. He does campaigns for congressmen, governors, and so forth. He wrote a book about Aaron Burr, and he brought it to my office, and he said, "Hey, here's a book, and tell me what you think." So I read it. He came back about 3 weeks later and said, "So what did you think?" We're sitting there, and I said, "Great writing. He is a good writer." And I said, "A lot of interesting stuff about Aaron Burr that I didn't know." My knowledge of Aaron Burr was around what most people have. He was in a duel, Alexander Hamilton. He killed Hamilton in the duel. End of history, right? That's pretty much your story. Right. Some people might know a little bit more, and if they read my book, they'll know even more. But so I told him, "Great book, but I think you missed the real story here. Everything they did to Burr, they're doing to Donald Trump." And at that time, when I was thinking about this, Trump was running again for president the 3rd time, and I said, "It's the same thing." And he looked at me like a lot of Democrats have looked at me for many years and said that I was nuts. He disagreed. He didn't see it. And even though I started pointing out things, he was not swayed at all by my advocacy. So I said, "Well, I'm going to write a book." And I did surprise him. Maybe 6-7 months later, I had it written, and I told him, "Here's my book. I've written one." So that's kind of the story of how it came about. And as I was researching more of Aaron Burr, and basically going through all the stuff that Trump was going through at the time, I kept seeing more and more of the similarities of what each had to withstand against their enemies.
Right. Yeah. It was interesting when I sped read it, but it brought out some interesting, definitely corollaries or similarities between the two. And your book, it nails how the swamp targets outsiders like Burr was and how Trump is. Can you dive into the specific strategies like the legal, the media, or otherwise that that the elites used against both of them similarly.
Right. And it's funny, we could start with the media because right now, we have this advocacy journalism that I personally dislike so much. I'm a former reporter, small community newspapers. I even owned one at one time. And I saw it happening on the local level to where, and that's why I started the paper. You couldn't get a fair shot. And I wanted to tell the story from, hey, wait a minute, you're missing the story. I guess I always see what they're missing rather than what they're telling me. But I knew they were unfair. And as time went on, and Trump, I really think, brought it forward that it was really more than just local, it's national, where these reporters, they go to school now and they're not taught. When I was in school, it was the 5 W's and the 1 H, and you were supposed to get that in the story as best you could in the first paragraph. Now you'll pick up a paper. I get the Chicago Tribune delivered. Most of the time, you won't find it, all of those things in there, but you will find the reporter's opinion. And that is a problem, whether it's in the print news or in the media on TV or radio. And I think what we forget, though, is it's not the first time this has happened. Everybody, at least when I was going to school, everybody had this great idea of journalism. It was Woodward and Bernstein and the Washington Post and, Ben Bradley telling them, go get your second, your second source. I'm not printing this with, just one source, because they took it seriously, right? Your editor did, your publisher did, even if they didn't have the same political bent to it, and a lot of them were still liberal, but it's getting crazy now. We're very few, I think it's 3%,
Right.
now say they're, Republicans. That is a problem with who they're hiring. And back in Burr's time, you had, they didn't have TV, radio. They had the print, and they had what was called the party press era, where the parties either owned the papers or they funded them with a lot of advertising and kept those papers going. We've seen some of that over the years, even still, but that was how Burr had a problem getting his message out. Alexander Hamilton and his supporters had papers. Hamilton started the New York Post, still around. It's conservative, but I think that's a good paper. But I'm sure people on the left think it's awful.
Right.
So we tend to, have that same problem where we're just reading or listening to the source we agree with, and that seems to be everywhere. It's not supposed to be, but each guy has dealt with that. Burr, couldn't get a fair shot with the newspapers. He had it probably just as bad as Trump because, Burr really wasn't aligned with anyone when he started in politics as an outsider. They kind of just took a liking to how he handled himself as a legislator and said, hey, this guy could help us, and put him on the ticket with Jefferson. But he wasn't really aligned with either party, kind of like Trump.
Right.
Trump, back in 2015, I'm sure he decided to run as a Republican because he saw the Democrats had lined up to have Hillary Clinton as the nominee. It wasn't that, he thought he was a Republican. A lot of his positions seemed to be more to the left at that time. And that's why at that time I thought, I want Jeb Bush, or I want one of these other 15 guys sitting up there, almost any other guy, because what I knew of Trump was he was more to the left. Now he's proven me wrong, as he proves a lot of people wrong. And I think he has moved to the right too. Although,
I think it's mostly common sense. Like
could be
both right and left. Well, especially it's my belief the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. There's very little, if any, true big bright line differences between the two, because they all are in elected office and they're all just robbing us blind and selling us out to the highest bidder. No matter, the Republicans are a little bit more polished about it, but so he's more of I would say he's a common sense centrist, that falls on the side of liberty, and which is really kind of what the founding fathers were. They just founded a small government that's only sort of focused on the people's liberty. And that's what I think he aligns more closely with.
I think that's a pretty good description. And if you look at him, from the Bush, Reagan, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
Conservatives, they've had to move more towards the center because of Trump.
Right.
And Trump has appealed to, unions, union workers, um, anti-war.
Right.
A lot of us who were saying hey, we're on the right, we still weren't real happy with the whole let's go to war everywhere,
Right.
especially if you have, young children. You're thinking, are they going to have to fight in some country I can't pronounce
Mhm.
and probably don't know where it is? Most of us don't know where it is. We find out later, it's like, okay, I kind of had an idea. It's somewhere in the Middle East, but, it is funny because you start thinking, uh, my son could die there or someone's daughter. And then in the end, you don't really win the war.
Right.
Maybe you spend 10 years and you're like, well, what did we get out of that?
Or
It's not
20,
like,
like
or
Afghanistan.
20, right? And, and I think that kind of maybe it started in Korea, but my memory is, Vietnam.
Mhm.
And you start looking at like the generals and the politicians send these, at that time, young boys
Mhm.
to fight. It's not their sons, and now it's not their sons and daughters. And I think Trump, to his credit, while he didn't fight, he also didn't want to lose other people to war. So that's been good for the Republican Party. I think it's made people realize we're not a bunch of warmongers.
Right.
And and I think fairness too. He's gone to some central issues on fairness for working people and taxes and so forth. That
Mhm.
some of it's the same, but he's kind of expanded it. The no tax on tips idea.
Right.
I always thought I always thought that was like, my mother was a waitress, so I always looked at it like that's a gift. If I tip someone, a waitress or a waiter,
Mhm.
I'm giving it. It's not part of the bill. And some people tip well, I know, and some people not too good at all.
Right. If at all.
Right, but it evens out
Mhm.
usually for that waiter or the waitress. And but I always thought they're getting a gift. Why are they paying taxes on that? It doesn't make sense to me. At least for the people that are really working. If you're making 150,000 as a waiter, we can discuss whether you should be paying taxes on tips.
You're making $150,000 as a waiter. You're a dang good waiter.
Well, maybe that's it, right?
Right.
But most waitresses and waiters aren't. They're not making much.
That leads into the is populism or the populist power. Your book points out that both Burr and Trump have this incredible ability to connect with people against the elite opposition. What do you think makes them such powerful populist leaders in their view? In your view?
Yeah, I think it's funny because they both come from Trump came from a well off family. Not as well off as he is now,
Mhm.
but certainly his dad wasn't you know working on the docks. He wasn't driving a bus. He had a decent life, and I think Burr's dad started Princeton University. So these aren't guys that had the real struggle, although they made something even better out of themselves. I think what they were able to do is Burr and Trump, even though they're outsiders, had some kind of connection to the regular guy, the common man, where they were able to see and ask, I suppose, you know, what's the issue and break it down into a policy. And they both were appealing in that way, and maybe just come off as you hear a lot of people say with Trump, I think he does care about me.
Right.
People that support him, they think, and I think that's the same thing with that Burr had, that he had this connection. Um, so I think they were popular amongst the regular people.
Mhm.
Probably more so with Trump because more of the regular people are involved now. It's not as elite as it was. Um, but I think and they see issues maybe where others don't. Trump, to his credit, saw the immigration issue long before most people did. I mean, maybe some of us always knew it was a problem, But, I know speaking for myself and a lot of people I've associated with, we blame both sides.
Mm.
I think I think now we can break that down and say that's not true anymore. Trump has made the Republican Party totally, um, anti illegal immigration. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
right. I don't know if they've done it yet. About the only thing they could do to improve it is go after the businesses too. If you employ someone that's here illegally, there should be dire consequences. And you know, I'm a big fan of that. Like if you knowingly do it, I guess if there's some reason you wouldn't know, but with e-verify, every time you see these stories, I always wonder, like, how did they get the job? You're supposed to be checking. Is that system not working? And why isn't the owner of this plant where you've just raided and people start running out, why aren't you taking him out in cuffs too? Because he's just as bad if you take the magnet out.
Mm.
And I think Trump gets that idea with Medicaid, with other issues. If you can't collect on the benefits, you can't work here. You'll voluntarily leave. These
Right.
people aren't stupid. They're here to make money
Yeah. There's
and
been
live a better life.
several states that have issued, changed laws here recently to turn off the magnets. We've done it here in Tennessee for a little bit, and there's still a
Mm.
little bit of a pushback against turning off all the magnets because the Chamber of Commies, as Rush Limbaugh used to call them, they love the cheap labor. So there's always going to be that the people that like the cheap labor that don't care about it, that they're going to find ways around it. And plus, a lot of those illegals let in under the last 4 years have been issued social security numbers. They've been paroled into the system. So,
Hmm.
they come here under a temporary protected status or a refugee status, claim asylum, and they're issued parole and given social security numbers. That's just terrible. And with that, we're gonna move right into our first break, and then ladies and gentlemen, stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. We're continuing our talk about the great and wonderful book. We'll talk about that at the end where you can find it. But Mr. Dennis Brennan here, we're going to talk about now. Were there other historical figures that you considered, including like Mr. or Aaron Burr and President Trump, that stood up to the establishment? How were their stories inspire our audience?
Yes, there's a little bit of a reference because there's a book done about the swamp and how many times it's actually been fought. And they consider that Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, um, Kennedy, that they all fought different swamps, and Reagan was another one. But they were all um, they did have some similarities, but they didn't have as many as Burr with the lawfare.
Mm,
So maybe that's a second book about how, but someone has written that already about the different swamps.
right.
And to some extent, some of them weren't, you know, with Lincoln, it was slavery and the whole, that's what they considered at that point, the deep state and
Mm,
fighting that, and you go all the way to Reagan. Well, with Kennedy, it's like the CIA, the FBI. Apparently, he did not win that fight because we're still fighting that,
right.
right? And Reagan was fighting the bureaucracy. Well, we're still fighting that too. And the deep state might be there forever. And I consider, like, you got the deep state, the administrative parts, the people that are in Washington, but then the swamp includes not only that, but the media and all the other influences that form to back that up. And you see it with anything Trump tries to do. There was a big debate going on now with the government shutting down, and Trump, I think rightly so, has said, we're going to lay people off. Well, yeah, you can't tell them to go home and then pay them for not working. I guess we did do that in COVID, so you could do it, but it's not something that you probably should be doing. And he's getting pushback on it. There were reporters at a news conference today, complaining about that. And I don't understand. It's like the money isn't there. Why do you think we're going to pay people to not work? But that's how we become. And so there's still pushback on that. And you can't, no matter what you do, it seems like the swamp, which I think the media is a big part of it, fights back with these talking points that a lot of people at home are probably feeling sorry for the guy that works in the office. And, we all kind of feel sorry for anybody that loses a job, right? You don't sit there and say, oh, it's, that's great that you lost your job at the government, or most of us don't. I mean, we might question why there's so many people working in a certain office, but we're not hoping that everybody gets fired. We want it to be efficient. And I think that was Reagan's battle. He wasn't really able to do that because it's never ending. They all combine to fight you back. And then the way we vote, the next guy comes in.
Don't vote, which is our
Or
biggest.
don't vote. Right. You wonder, right. That's a whole other issue, right? And it seems like, and even when you talk about voting, and, if we go back to immigration at one point, I don't think I realized when I was holding both parties responsible,
Mhm.
Everybody had the talking point that, well, the businesses want it. Those are all the Republican guys. They want the cheap labor, blah, blah, blah. And the Democrats, they just, they want voters. It really turns out they want congressional districts because
Right.
of, I had seen that if you got rid of the illegals, you would have like 10 seats between New York, Illinois, and California, at least 10 seats, maybe 15 that would go to like Florida, Texas, Tennessee,
Right.
uh, places like that. And obviously, those would probably switch for the most part to Republican seats. Well, I don't know, if you transfer 15 seats, I don't know if the Democrats can win a congressional majority.
Yeah,
And
it's about also electoral power,
yes,
electoral college.
exactly. So now they all lose electoral votes.
Mhm.
And when that presidential race comes up, as we all look at the board
Mhm.
and we start going, oh, well, you need less of those 7 swing states.
Right.
It becomes easier. Like, in Illinois, um, where we have 44% of the vote being Republican, but we have 4 congressmen. It seems like we should have about 6 or 7. So,
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense. And I see now why they did that. It's electoral votes, it's the power in Congress. So, that's something I think Trump realized, and probably why he's putting so much effort into immigration, ICE raids in Illinois, New York, out in California. You've got to go after the people out there.
Right. You got to make it uncomfortable for them to stay there, so they want to go back home.
Right.
And
Yeah. And I mean, it is a problem, right? Because for so many years we talk about all these countries. Well, the excuse is, well, it's so poor and they've got no life. And, but then when we say, hey, we'll put money in, we'll help you build your country, you get people complaining, your nation building, stop it. You can't be, because we put money in and then they go to a socialist government or something. And it's like, well, taxpayers don't want to waste their money on that.
yeah,
If you wanted something that functioned and benefited us,
mm,
maybe then, but it's almost impossible to get done.
absolutely. We talked a little bit about it, about the swamp's always there. And you mentioned, laying off the workers and then paying them back and all that. That's been established already in a couple of other shutdowns, right? Hey, we're going to give you back pay for the time you spent at home. And so that's in a customary position. So I think, Russ Vaught, OMB director, prior he was at the Center for Renewing America. I think we have a unique opportunity here to definitely shrink the size of God. I'm not one that's going to cheer when somebody loses their job, but I am going to cheer when the political bias and the deep state, I consider the administrative state that has ruled vice the elected representatives, that has ruled our country for so long, are showed the door. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need it. Government is, our founding fathers, they would poop their pants if they saw the size of our federal government. It's the largest employer in our country. How did we get to that point? So making it more efficient is definitely so. That's I think why the swamp did not want him elected the first time, successfully cheated the second time, and the third time they tried to kill him. And
Yeah.
so it's a deadly fight back.
It is, and I think and that moment in Butler when he gets up, that tells you something not only about the courage, but that's some political skill. I don't think I would think of that.
Right.
I'd be on the ground probably, carry me out of here, get me out. I don't think I'd want to stand up telling the Secret Service, no, no, and raising my fist. That was good thinking on his part. And
He's
it
very
goes to,
smart. He's got great instincts. And I mean, because
yeah,
what that did, in my mind, what that did when he stood up, fight, 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 blood streaming down, I said, that showed Americans, it embodied the American fighting spirit. And that's what
yeah,
everybody strives for Americans to be. We fight against all odds and we triumph in the end. And that's what that showed. And that's what I think that really kind of turned the tide.
I think it did. What it certainly did is, the supporters, if you weren't watching it, like I wasn't watching it, I forget, I might have been watching, baseball or something, and I got a text from my son saying, Trump was shot. Right away switched to channel. Here when you're watching the Chicago White Sox, it's not a big deal to change the channel, but but I was like, holy cow! At that point, you don't know what happened because all he said was he was shot. And now the news is spreading and it's everywhere. It's going off on Twitter and everything else. And you're watching it on, Fox or whatever you turn on. And you realize as they keep showing this, he's right. Something, God saved him to turn. And for whatever reason, he had the instinct and the political instinct to let everybody know I'm okay and to fight. And I think it did get his supporters to say, yeah, I'm going to vote. And I think it also turned some of those people. I want to say it was Kennedy. Someone said yes. That's Kennedy or Musk. Someone, it might have been both of them. It said they were leaning that way to do something with him, but they were so when they saw him do that, they realized, wait a minute, this is something special, and they wanted to be part of it.
Right.
And you got guys like that, like Musk, who appealed to a lot of younger people.
Mm.
I think Kennedy appealed to not only a lot of Democrats, but also some young people. And when they're coming on board, the momentum from that day on just seemed to pick up and
Right.
gain so much steam.
I mean, look at his cabinet. We got a former co-chair of the DNC
Mm-hmm.
in Tulsi Gabbard.
Mm-hmm.
We got the biggest liberal family icon as part of his cabinet. I mean, he
Yeah.
inspires a lot. And so for our audience who are fired up about, liberty and leadership, it's a part of my themes. So what
Yeah.
are some of the key takeaways from your book that they can act on to resist the swamp in their own lives?
Yeah, and it's not easy because the swamp, I think, wants to wait it out, right? And they hope like down the road Trump is gone.
Mm.
Let's say it's not, let's say the Democrats get back in there. We're going to have an election in 2026. I think part of our own lives is taking part in that. It's not enough to say, hey, I went out and voted for Trump and now either things didn't move fast enough or everything's okay, because neither is really true. You'll have an election in 26 where, the House could, swing. I don't think the Senate will, but maybe it could. You don't want to predict things, right? It's
Right.
Every time people sit there and say, oh, this is what's going to happen, they're wrong. They really don't know. And the best way is to stay involved, make sure you vote, tell other people. And I think, one of the things that we've seen, especially with, Musk being involved and Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, people who put a lot on the line. Musk put his money on the line, but he also he's a businessman. It's not, if he's going to sacrifice that and take all the threats he had, and Kennedy basically said, I mean, he's royalty in the Democrat Party, the Kennedy family is,
Mhm.
for him to switch over, maybe not registration wise, but
Right.
to be part of this administration, is telling people it's okay. Those of us that are supporters and really believe in what Trump is doing should be out there talking it up. I think the first term, a lot of people were quiet. They all were almost afraid because the left is so,
Virulent.
yeah, exactly.
They
And they,
shot the most moderate guy that was speaking just a couple of weeks ago.
right, right. Charlie Kirk was the guy trying to have discussions.
Mm,
And that's what they always used to say. Oh, if you would just have a discussion. Well, he tried. And
right.
I think, but we have to keep trying just as he did. And maybe it's, neighbor to neighbor, people, wherever you run into, try to convince them. And, if they're not, and what I find is a lot of people don't know the issues. Like they don't, I said at the beginning about not knowing about Burr.
Mm,
That's ancient history. People have no idea what's going on now. If you ask them, they'll take the tidbits from the media,
mm,
and unfortunately, they might be reading the Tribune or the New York Times, or maybe they're watching, Sunday Morning with George, who worked for Clinton, why
right.
he's on TV, and you sit there and go, well, they're taking facts and slanting them their way, so you have to be able to fight back against that and do your own research, watch other networks that have a better way of communicating, and
Mm,
actually you can tell are telling you more of the truth than some of those legacy media. I call them the Dem media in the book
mm.
because of all the connections, but
The, the
it's,
the the organ grinder of the DNC, every one of them.
yeah, and you see that, look at the Russian collusion story from where it started. They get a Pulitzer Prize for this. And really, you should be disqualified from ever receiving any award when you basically get an award for a fake story. That's ridiculous. And
And they still
uh,
back it. They
oh, I know.
still.
And that goes to the information. People still think that Trump was a pawn of Putin, or that Putin still kicks him around, no matter what evidence is presented. And I can only think they don't see the evidence, or they don't want to see it, because some of these people aren't dumb. But what the Democrats do is they keep spreading the same story.
Right.
If you go on Facebook, X, you will see things posted, and mostly on Facebook, it's just a total lie. And you're like, but I suppose there's people that support Trump that see that and go, "Oh, that's news." No, it's not.
No. No.
And unfortunately, we have to do our own research.
Which gets into a whole nother topic that I don't regularly get into. We've had a couple of generations now, and we'll talk about this when we come back from our next break. So stick with us. I'm going to get into this in the next break, folks. Okay, we're back. As we left off, I was going to talk about something about the media and doing the research for ourselves in this segment of the show, and talk about this a lot. And it's our public education system has not, for a couple of generations now, created critical thinkers, people capable of critical thinking. They've created automatons that they show up when a bell sounds, they go home when a bell sounds, they only respond to the authority figure at the front of the classroom, and everything that person says is fact. And that those people that are at the leading edge of our classrooms now, they're not teaching them how to critically think. They're providing them information to pass a standardized test. So, I mean, as far as people getting the information, they're not even willing to go look for it because they're not capable of critical thinking at the outset. So that's why we end up with a swamp.
Well, you're right, and it's funny. I think each wherever you go for school, it's not so important on what school you're at, although there's a great discrepancy between at least in Illinois, and I believe nationally, where the good schools, get better test scores and they have more students go to college and so forth. And you think in the end, okay, we're successful. First of all, I should confess, I was the board president of our high school district for 6 of the 8 years I was on the board. We did have outstanding scores. We were one of the top schools. But, the student themselves have to take some responsibility because the education system, which I think is part of the swamp, and the teachers' unions often they're doing the same thing that the media is doing. They're indoctrinating, they're advocating, they're part of the party system rather than, teaching you how to think. And what I've run into over my career, and I find it hard to believe, but you work with people or you even communicate with people and they'll tell you something. They're like, did you look that up? Because that's not true. And often, I find myself now doing my own research on everything. And I shouldn't have to, but I think those are the culprits, the education system and the media system. The education system, I kind of taught myself to do that. And, indoctrination isn't new. When I was in college, we had, professors who had a certain liberal view, most of them. And, in class, a lot of us would agree. I found myself once arguing with the professor, and there might have been 30 people in the class. Nobody backed me up. His way of winning the argument in his mind was, does anybody else agree? Right. Nobody's going to agree with me, right? Now, when the test comes, you write what he wants to see, and then you go out in the hall and talk about him and say what an idiot he is.
Right.
That was the way it used to be. That transformed now in the modern day where the students go to college and they believe what the professor's saying, that America's a bad country, that we have systemic racism, that, you can't get by unless you put these special, steps in for people. And it's like, yes, we had a racist history. We fought a war over it, lost more people in that war than any other. So I'd say the fact that at least half the country said, no, we're going to fight a war over this, tells me that not every single guy you run into is racist. Even that.
It's not systemic. And if it is systemic, look at the people in charge of the system.
Right. Well, Chicago's a great example. It's been run by, a lot of black politicians for a while, and not only Chicago, the state, their county, state. And so if it's just systemic, are they part of that? It doesn't make sense that they be racist also against black people, or it's such a great excuse that in the minds of these teachers or professors, and for some reason the students are buying it. Some of them are buying this idea that socialism is good, but nobody said, hey, read a book, study all the countries that have tried it and tell me the one that works. And they can't. And that's the problem.
They just haven't tried it right.
Oh, that's exactly it. Yes, there's a friend of mine who told me she had a nephew who back from college told her that. She was like, what are you talking about? Socialism. And he's like, well, they just didn't know how to do it right. Well, what makes you think we would do it right? I don't think we're kind of built for the capitalist society, freedom, and now it seems like it's tied hand in hand, isn't it? You got people going with socialism and then at the same time taking away freedoms, whether it's COVID or freedom of speech, which we've seen, when you take Trump off of Facebook and banned him from, at that time, Twitter, if he can be banned, I sure can be banned, and you can be banned. And
I've had several of my episodes already suppressed.
And that, no matter what you say, you should be, as long as you're not, inciting people to to actually go to war against the government and commit treason, you should be able to say what you want as long as it's not a crime. The fact is, though, they allow speech that does do that stuff. Antifa has people on the street fighting. How did they get there? There's
Right.
some way through social media that they're letting them know. I
Right.
don't see it.
They don't attack us because they think, or try to kill us because they think we're literally Hitler or we're fascists or we're an existential threat to democracy. No, they call us those things so they can kill us.
Yeah,
It's
I
in
think
their
that's
mind.
right.
And the leadership does that reason. I mean, California's governor just recently, his press secretary or whoever's running his press handle on X just said Stephen Miller's a fascist. What
Yeah.
do people think that does? That takes those low information people, which our education system cranks out by the dozens now, hundreds of thousands, creates in
Hmm.
their mind it's a justification to kill them. And they know it.
Well, and if they didn't know it, they should know it from what was it, September 10th,
Yes.
when Charlie Kirk was shot
Uh,
and killed. I mean,
well, they know it from two attempts on Trump's life.
well, sure, he's been called Hitler, and
Forever, right? I mean, ever
yeah,
since 2000, the golden escalator, he's been Hitler. Prior to that, he was the greatest thing for the Democrats, right? Until he started going off on Obama's birth certificate. The Democrats loved him.
right. Until then, yes, and you see that, and I go into that in the book a little bit about all the shows he was on and all the back and forth. You
Right?
know, not
Oprah, I
only
mean,
Jimmy Fallon,
some of
Oprah,
Oprah Winfrey's highest rating shows were Donald Trump on.
right. Well, Trump was a television celebrity. It was like money in the bank for these guys. So,
Right.
The View, you want people to watch, put Donald Trump on.
Yeah,
And it wasn't only that show, it was all of them. All the shows that then turn against him, and I'm sure he feels, you know, awful to hear them speak that way because he probably thought they were friends. And
right.
you find out, just like Aaron Burr and Trump, they both found out you go to Washington, you don't have any friends.
Nope.
They're just, that's not, it's just not something you have, and I think for, this idea where they're calling names, you wish it would stop, but it's not. Because even after Kirk being assassinated, you had Democrat politicians doubling down. It's almost like, well, we know they're out of ideas because that's obvious. Trump has taken all the ideas that they should have been pushing, but they were distracted and went off on woke ideology and other issues. And those like working man issues that Trump now is just taken and pulled to the right for himself
Mhm.
and probably for the party for the foreseeable future. It's I guess all you can yell is he's a fascist and he's another Hitler. I mean, I truly believe you can't compare anybody to Hitler because he killed 6 million Jews, and that's quite an accomplishment, And then, it's the same way as comparing people to Jesus Christ. You just don't do it.
Right.
And I think, compare him to other people. And no, Mussolini and Stalin aren't other people. You could do it, you
Right.
know. But if you want to talk about maybe presidents that took power away, if that's your problem, or I don't see them doing that, but whatever the comparison, I think their problem is they really can't find anything. And if they do, it probably goes back to like Franklin Roosevelt and the internment of the Japanese people. And you'd say, oh, now everybody realizes that was a bad idea. At
Right.
the time, I'm sure everybody was like, yes, lock them down, gather them all around. We're very worried because we were at war. I
Right.
mean, at the time, not having lived at that time, I'm guessing, and from reading that seems to be the common sense idea at the time. And now we look back, and we have for a while, so that's a stain on our history. Well, yes, but what has Trump done? I guess they can compare, throwing illegals out and trying to say that's the same as Japanese people who were citizens here. But
Right.
I don't get the connection, and maybe that's the problem.
There actually isn't, and this is in my mind. There isn't that they do what they do because they want to inspire violence. You know, we have to, like you said earlier, we have to educate and inform other people, especially those that are on the fence. But those that are truly the ones that are willing to pick up a 30-06 and kill the moderate, those are the people you cannot peacefully coexist with. You can't. They're
Right.
rabid. There's no amount of talking or facts or data or logic that will ever change their mind. And those are the people that the leaders of the Democrat Party hope to inspire with their, socialist, fascist, Hitler rhetoric. Because if they can take care of our problem, we can get back to power, and there's no blood on our hands other than our words. So there's no peaceful coexistence with the people that are willing to just shut you up because of the words you speak. We're willing to kill you for that. But we do have to educate everybody else that's sitting on the fence that don't know the true facts. We have to get to them so we can
Right.
build upon what Trump is doing right now.
And I think that's what's helped, like, Elon Musk buying Twitter, I think has helped immensely. You have a lot of podcasts, which, even back in, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure if you look 2015 compared to now, it
Yeah.
seems to have ballooned. I think, Facebook has come around. I don't know if he's playing both sides, Zuckerberg, but at least they're not knocking people out. And as far as I know, there's not a lot of Facebook jailing going on, like was the big joke where people said anything and they were taken down for a while, which makes no sense. I think those are all good ideas. Anybody that writes, you can now be. I think it's Elon said we are the media. It's true, but it's not only X. It's everywhere. If people have something to say it. Get out there on the podcast, get out there on Substack or any other outlet you can. Make sure you're on X. Everybody can post on X. All you have to do is sign up, and
Yep.
and the silly stuff that's put out there. The Democrats are actually paying people on X to post. To the best of my knowledge, the Republicans aren't. If they are, I would hope they contact me because I'll be all over that. I
Right.
will take the pay. But, these guys are getting paid and they're constantly spreading misinformation.
Mhm.
And I get that if you're sitting there, you got to read the comments because someone will jump in and correct it,
Mhm.
or you have to do the research. It's, we're the media and we're the media checkers or watchers.
Community notes for the win.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that's what you find out that it's not true what they're putting out there.
Hi, Dennis. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Tell the audience the name of the book again, where they can find it, and
Okay, this is the copy of it. It's called DC Swamp Strikes Back. Uh, Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and their similar battles. It is available where all good books are sold, including Amazon.com. It's also Barnes and Noble. There's 50 other locations. My favorite one is my own website, authordennisbrennan.com. You can buy it there. It's actually on sale there. And, wherever you buy it is a good idea.
all right, I'll hang a link to your website in the description of the podcast. And it was our pleasure having you on. And is there anything more you would like to share with the audience before we go?
No, I think you covered an awful lot of information. I think there's more in the book that tells you, the similarities, the little differences between the two. I think some of it we've lived through, and I think for the history we missed, people will be surprised to know about Aaron Burr. They might even be surprised about some of the Donald Trump information, even though we've lived in it, because there's so much. But I think
Past,
they'll find it entertaining.
past does predict future, and if we just look at our past, we can see the similarities there. And the deep state has a long and deep history in our country. So, well, thank
Yes.
you, Dennis, for coming on the show, and hope you have a great returns and maybe another book here in the future.
I hope so.
All right, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on this week's show. And man, did Dennis Brennan just deliver some great information. His book, DC Swamp Strikes Back, Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and Their Similar Battles, is a must read for anyone who wants to understand what it takes to lead with courage in the face of a corrupt DC swamp. Dennis showed us how Aaron Burr and President Donald J. Trump embody the kind of leadership that refuses to bow to elite lies. And folks, I'm still buzzing from this conversation. It's a reminder that true leaders just don't survive the swamp. They fight it head on and inspire us to do the same. What struck me most today was how Dennis broke down the similarities of Aaron Burr and President Trump, and two men who, centuries apart, faced the same vicious attacks from a power-hungry establishment. Burr stood up to a rigged treason trial and political smears, leading with defiance against the elites who wanted him gone. Trump's doing the same thing today, powering through impeachments, indictments, media assaults to lead America back to greatness in 2025 and beyond. Dennis's book shows that leadership isn't about following the crowd. It's about standing alone when the swamp comes for you, staying true to your principles, and rallying the people to fight for liberty. This episode is a wake-up call for every patriot listening. The swamp is still out there, using every trick to crush leaders who dare to challenge it. But Dennis's work gives us hope. Burr and Trump, they both prove that real leadership can beat the odds. It's up to us to take on that inspiration and lead in our own lives, whether it's calling out local corruption, supporting fearless leaders like Trump, or Monty Fritz running for Tennessee governor, or teaching the next generation to stand up for freedom. Leadership isn't for just the history books. It's for every one of you tuning in, ready to make a difference. I can't thank Mr. Brennan enough for joining us and showing us what leadership against the swamp looks like. So grab DC Swamp Strikes Back. It's a guide for anyone who wants to lead with courage and fight the lies of the establishment. Patriots, we need to carry this fire forward. We need to support leaders who stand for liberty and call out the swamp corruption, either in Tennessee or in DC, and never stop leading the charge for a free America. So stay bold, stay free, and keep leading. This week's wisdom from God's word comes to us from the book of Hosea, chapter 9, verse 9. They have sunk deep into corruption, as in the days of Gibeah. God will remember their wickedness and punish them for their sins. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to sit by and wait for God to hand down his holy punishment. We can do what is in our power to do in this temporary home. We can ensure that corrupt people are not elected to serve or re-elected to serve. Or if we find out about their corruption once they are elected, we don't have to let our apathy let them to continue in office. We too have to exercise our leadership in our system of self-governance. Thanks for leaning in today. Please subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And you can join me on X. The handle is @LarryForTN12 or @LiesLiberty. As always, you can also visit libertyleadershipandlies.com for more. And let's keep standing in the arena for liberty, leadership, and truth. God bless you. God bless Tennessee. And God bless these United States of America. Until next week, Reveille, it's time to wake up.